This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
There's plenty to talk about. The last hope for some for a left tackle. Replacement is gone. Sad story with Will Smith. More NFL draft goodness all here on the Hindsight 20. I am your host, Jerry Mallory. I want to thank each and every one of you for listening. As always, a proud member of the Detroit Sports Podcast. I've been doing this thing for a little while now. Almost half a year, not quite 6 months. 6 months down, 600,000 million, billion, trillion to go. Every week right here giving you Detroit Lions, the news, the views, and the opinions. Not just me, Doc and Jock, Tigers Talk, you name it, it's here one-on-one. We try to bring in some of the local personalities on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. You've got Podbay, that's great, that's for Android, and then iTunes. All those formats you can subscribe, and of course you can follow me on Twitter at Jerry Mallory NFL. Ton to talk about, so we're going to get right into it. I think one of the bigger stories, because this was the last guy for some. The last bastion of hope for the Lions was Ryan Clady. Ryan Clady, ex of the Denver Broncos. There's been injury issues with him, but when healthy, one of the best left tackles in the league. The ACL is not his first big injury. The age, the contract price. He's not extremely old, but when you add the injuries, having torn ACLs and continual knee injuries kind of ages you, if you will. You add all those things to the mix. He was expendable, especially once Denver picked up Russell Okung. You knew his time was coming. On the flip side, the Lions, hey, last year, even the year before, but especially last year, that offensive line, the tackle positions, I mean, it was bad. And Stafford stayed upright. Don't know how he did it. Don't know how he keeps doing it. Not sure if he's going to be able to in 2016. And so we knew that something had to give. We saw Russell Okung being a free agent. That was a potential target. We knew Trent Williams could potentially be one, although many expected him to re-sign or get franchised by Washington. And sure enough, he's back there with the Redskins. And of course, the draft is where we're going to look as well. That's still an option. But we thought someone in free agency, Joe Barksdale, a Detroit native, Cass Tech High School alumni, that was someone that we all thought was a possibility. Donald Penn. Maybe it wasn't a left tackle. Maybe it could have just been a right tackle. So you've got Andre Smith. Name after name after name came and went. And then Russell Okung was connected to the Lions. The Lions supposedly having a good meeting with him. At one point, we were considered the front runners. At the 11th hour, he signs with the Denver Broncos on a very friendly deal. I mean, it's a 1-year deal, essentially, and it's team option after team option. You can't really beat the deal that Denver did. And as it comes and, we find out he just didn't want to play here. A combination of maybe the location. He says he wanted to play on the West Coast, but, there's still a stigma about Detroit as a whole, the city and the state of Michigan, not just the weather, but other things, as we know. Of course, the culture, it is not a winning culture. We're trying to instill that. At the end of the day, whatever the reason or reasons were, he's gone. At that point, though, everyone else was already signed. We know this story. And so Ryan Clady was someone we looked at. We knew something was going to happen. There's no way that you keep him around and you have Okung. And we thought we would have been a suitor, not knowing how much it would cost. Would it be a third or a fourth? That's a little steep. Lo and behold, he goes to the Jets, and it's not a ransom. Essentially, they gave up a 5th-round pick, and they received Ryan Clady and a 7th-round pick. The deal, his contract, he was due to make a little north of $10 million this year. They restructured the contract, and now with the Jets, he'll be making $6 million with $3 guaranteed, and it can go up to $7.5 million in incentives. They saw a need and they reacted quickly. DeBrickashaw Ferguson, DeBrickashaw, a classic name for those of you that watch Key and Peele. He may have been the impetus for their little segment, that skit that they had when they did the East-West game, and they start going with all these crazy names, that the black athletes sometimes have. My brothers, a lot of times, some of our names are a little crazy. DeBrickashaw Ferguson was probably, an impetus or one of those guys they looked at and said, you know what? We can make a skit and end up being one of the funniest skits that I've seen in a long time. Anyways, solid left tackle for years. He retires. The Jets know there's a need. They reacted quickly. And the Lions are just sitting there. I kept saying it. We need to sign one. We need to draft one. You look at Jeff Schwartz, and for a time we thought potentially he could be someone that would play a little tackle. We know he can play guard. He's probably going to be the backup guard, which is good. That's a nice solid guy you have as your third guard behind Lakin and behind Larry. But we still need that tackle. And Clady was, the thing that kind of, it bothers me a little bit is, number one, we have the money, especially on this deal. It's more than palatable. Even if it was just a 1-year deal on his old contract, $10 million or so, you can eat it for that 1 year. But it's not even that. And we certainly have the picks. We've got 10 draft picks this year. In terms of fifth rounders, we've got 2. 1 we can trade, 1 we can't. And then in the 6th round, we've got 3. We've got 3 6 rounders. And so I get it. You acquire picks. You want youth. And there's a method to all of this. But I feel like we can look back on this year and you got to protect your quarterback. It's even deeper than simply wins and losses next year. It comes down to Matthew Stafford or whoever you want throwing your football in the next few years. But right now it's going to be Stafford. And I think it's going to be him in the foreseeable future being able to throw the ball. Okay. We've seen what happens when ineffective play from an offensive lineman, is met with a dominant pass rusher. Do you remember when Jeff Backus was completely outplayed by Julius Peppers, and Julius Peppers lit Matt Stafford up? We've seen it happen. We saw the first few years of Stafford taking a beating and a pounding. He was beat down this year, bloody, bruised. His hand and his whole body is black and blue. And it's the NFL. It's going to happen. It's not just the Lions, but that offensive line has been bad. And right now, the tackle position, it's the same 2 guys. It's Riley Reif. It's Michael Ola. Now, things got better when Ola came in. I'm not going to deny that because he was much better than Waddle, much better than Lucas. Yet and still, the whole draft one, sign one thing to me, I believed firmly in. We talk about depth, right? Quinn talks about depth, needing guys. So even if you feel comfortable with these 2, you still would have liked as a fan for them to bring in a bigger name. Now, who's left in terms of tackles? Not a lot. You got Beatty, Will Beatty, and that's about it in terms of free agent. After that, it gets thin. Now, June 1st, you'll see some cuts, and there's a potential for us to look in that, in that area. But the sign one, draft one thing is looking like draft one and pray. Maybe that's the new plan. Now, Quinn's being smart. I tweeted about this, again, at Jerry Mallory NFL. When you see some of these free agents getting big contracts, I think the money that we had, we're signing a lot of 1-year deals, and we're going to have more money to spend next year. The cap situation looks friendly once again with the increases, and we've got guys to sign. Darius Slay, I think he's getting paid this year, so you have to factor in his contract. Ezekiel Ansah, I just have 2 words, and this is going to sum up how much money Ziggy Ansah is going to get. Olivier Vernon. I rest my case. Larry Warford, Sam Martin, even Devin Taylor, and yes, Theo Reddick. It's the product of a great draft, and I talk about it a lot, but it's a product of having a great 2013 draft. All of those guys are free agents at the same time. Now, Ansah, you can franchise him next year. He's signed on because you have the 5th-year option, but all the other guys are unrestricted free agents after next season. I think Slay gets signed, and then after Slay, though, you got Martin, you got Taylor, you got Reddick, you got Warford. I think all guys, in the terms of what the Lions are trying to do, should be here in the long term, in the foreseeable future. So I get it, not spending a ton of money, but Clady is on essentially a 1-year deal. You've got an easy schedule. You're trying to win now. It's not a complete rebuild. Would have loved to have Clady in for 1 year. Then you draft that guy, be it Decker or Conklin. I'm seeing Ronnie Stanley fall a little bit. You would love for, you have this glorified 1-year deal out of Okun or out of Clady. And, if they play so good and you want to keep them, well, you have that team option. Or that guy you draft is ready to step up. That's the option as well. But right now, it's not looking like it's going to be that way. In terms of the draft, we know some of the bigger names, and I'm going to throw a few more offensive line names in just a little bit. We're going to talk about a little bit of draft and some options toward the end of the show. Now, to move on to a sad note, and I know all of you heard about this, is former defensive end of the New Orleans Patriots. New Orleans Patriots? I was just determined to talk about New England, wasn't I? I started off by saying New England. I got it right, said New Orleans, and still said the Patriots. I apologize. Will Smith, former defensive end of the New Orleans Saints, shot down and killed this past weekend. Apparent road rage incident. Just my thoughts on it. He was a really good pro. One of those guys that was always around. Not a Hall of Famer. One of those guys that could potentially be a Pro Bowler any number of years. Just a really solid career. But the actual story and what happened is it's gut-wrenching. It's heartbreaking. It's one of those ones, I think, something similar that I kind of think back to with Steve McNair, where a guy is alive and, you're not thinking about him a ton. They've retired from the league, but not that long ago. And then next thing you know, it's a gun incident and they're dead. This one gets a little sticky. Now, at first, we thought it was simply a road rage incident. He was rear-ended. There was an exchange of words. Then the driver of the other car, I believe he was in a Hummer, guns down Will Smith and injures his wife. And that's what really, that's tough. I think for it to happen, but then for your wife to be right there, to have to see that. And I'm not trying to bring the podcast on a solemn, solemn note, but it's a topical thing. I had a buddy who passed, and he was in a motorcycle accident. He was killed by a drunk driver. Ironically enough, the drunk driver was just leaving an AA meeting, and she had her baby in the car, of all things, and struck my buddy down, killed him. Which was so sad about it, though, was that his wife was trailing him in a car. So she was in the car, and right in front of her was her husband. So to see that happen, just to tie that in with Will Smith, his wife, to see this happen is horrible. The world we live in, I really love and enjoy sports, I think, because it is an escape. It is a getaway. Even from a young age, I do a little bit better now, but I'm not real big on watching the news. You want to be aware of what's happening, but sometimes it's too much. And sports is definitely an escape. But even our sporting world is not immune to some of the stories and some of the events. And so the events and surroundings with this thing is getting a little bit sticky. Number one, the gunman, who's right now looks like he's going to be charged with second-degree murder. He filed a wrongful death lawsuit back in 2005 against the New Orleans Police Department. His father, who they said was mentally challenged, not severely, but mentally challenged, was gunned down over an incident. I guess he had a pocket knife. It was an altercation. And instead of restraining him or retaining him, maybe using pepper spray or using a taser, a stun gun, they shot him down and killed him. He won the case, or maybe they settled out of court. Either way, he got a sum of money. The cops, in their defense, they weren't equipped with the retaining or restraining means, they said. And so a knife can be considered a deadly weapon. They didn't have the means to restrain him, supposedly, and so they shot and killed him. And so one of the weird events with this situation was, this happened in 2005. Flash forward 11 years, and the gentleman that gunned down Will Smith, well, he filed this lawsuit, and one of the cops involved with it that was mentioned, who was a part of the killing of this man's father, just that evening, had dinner with both Will Smith and Pierre Thomas, ex of the New Orleans Saints. And so there's kind of a weird connection with that. Was this something where this gunman kind of following them? Was this a 10-year vendetta that he's always had? And, he's waiting for the right time or place to retaliate. What was the connection between Will Smith and this cop? We don't know all the details, but they're coming out. Maybe by next week's show, there's even more things. But it's real sticky. And then this guy was even a security guard for the New Orleans Saints. So maybe he's had run-ins with Will Smith. It's just, there's connections there now to where it doesn't seem like just a random situation. I always tell my wife about road rage, and I think we're all a victim of it, including myself. We do not own guns, either one of us, and I'm not here giving a speech on guns. That's not my intent, but just, I'm always telling her that, when we honk the horn and you get upset with someone, you gotta avoid it, because people out here are crazy. A lot of people have guns. We don't. We would not be able to withstand that. And, you're really supposed to use your horn to warn people, not to send a message. It's really sad. It's a sad reality. And it happens all the time. Just when it happens on a higher scale, someone that we have a connection with, albeit just an athlete, but we know of him, you think about it even more. Be safe out there on the roads, guys. We just dropped my wife's friend off to the airport, and you know how bad the weather is this weekend. And on 94 West, there was at least 2 to 3 accidents because people drive crazy. And you add crazy driving with bad weather, and they don't modify their crazy driving with the bad weather. It just gets worse. And then looking the other way on 94 East, there was cars all over the place. These accidents can sometimes bring out the worst in us. There's frustration. Sometimes, there's blame to pass around. Words are exchanged. And in this case, we see it can lead to someone's life. And so I just try to remind myself, and I'm not just trying to give like a public service announcement, just giving my spiel. Be careful out there. Be conscious. It's best to turn the other cheek and sometimes just let things go because, the temperament that you may have is not always going to be the same. And a lot of times it isn't. You don't know what's on someone's mind, what their disposition or mental makeup is. Be safe out there, ladies and gentlemen. Really sad story about Will Smith. You wish the best for his family, his friends. I believe he was a father of a few children. Really, really sad story. We're going to move on, shifting gears to our typical NFL talk. The last 3 episodes, we did the Know Your Foe segment. Last 2 episodes, I'm sorry. We've done the Chicago Bears, the Green Bay Packers. Now it's time for the champs of the NFC North. Used to saying that and saying the Green Bay Packers, but this year, the champs of the NFC North were none other than the Minnesota Vikings. Head coach Mike Zimmer, young guy in terms of head coaching experience. They looked good last year. The usual suspect of Adrian Peterson, you start off anytime you're talking about this foe, you got to mention him. And I'm just not in the business of counting him out. No matter if he struggles with fumbles, et cetera, et cetera. The way he came back from that ACL tear a few years ago, I'm not ready to say Father Time has caught up with him. He's always someone you have to consider. Now, Teddy Bridgewater is a fine player as well. Young guy, good accuracy. The team as a whole, you remember the heartbreaking, gut-wrenching playoff loss, missed opportunity, missed kicks, and the Seattle Seahawks advance. That was bad. And when that happened, I was like, what was worse? Our playoff run where we were cheated and screwed by the Dallas Cowboys or losing based off of, a missed kick. I don't know. In any event, this team is young. They have lots of talent. And, I expect them to be just as good, if not better, next year. So 11-5 is definitely in the realm of possibility. They might drop down 1 and go to 10. They might go up and win 12. They've drafted very good. Rick Spielman, their GM, this was a guy I mentioned like, hey, there were some rumors that, contract disputes and he may be available. And I was all for it because he's brought in some really good players. Just to name some of them on offense, like we said, Bridgewater, solid young quarterback, Stephon Diggs, one of the better young receivers last year, was not highly touted. He came in, he did his thing. But really to me, it's on the defense where you see this young nucleus slowly but surely becoming a dominant force. It starts with Harrison Smith, one of, if not the best safety in all of the NFL. Anthony Barr, another player that I really like for the Detroit Lions. He went, I think, 1 pick before the infamous Eric Ebron pick, young, speedy linebacker. Then you've got Sheriff Floyd out of Florida, defensive tackle, big man. Really like him. Then they got the young corners. We remember Trey Waynes from Michigan State, and then they have Xavier Rhodes. It's a young nucleus, and I really like. I like this team, man. I hate to admit it because the better they are, the worse our chances are of beating them and or competing with our division. I really do think them and the Packers are about a pace ahead of us, the Lions, and the Bears and the Lions are a little bit closer than I would like to really realistically admit. But, the season will bear itself out. Now, in terms of key additions, they bring in Alex Boone from the San Francisco 49ers. He can play center, but more than likely he'll start at the guard position. And then they went ahead and shored up their right tackle spot by bringing in Andre Smith from the Cincinnati Bengals on a 1-year deal worth $3.5 million. Now, they were interested in George Iloka or Ioka. I don't know. I still don't know how to pronounce his name, guys. They were interested in that safety. Remember that safety from Cincinnati, George the safety? The same guy the Lions were interested in, well, they were as well. He did not go there, so they went ahead and they signed Michael Griffin. They also picked up Travis Lewis. We remember him, ex of the Lions, linebacker, fine player. Probably will be slotted in terms of special teams with a chance to start. Didn't lose a ton of guys, but Mike Wallace did depart from the team. And so the outlook on this team, I like what they did on the offensive line. Matt Khalil's in a make-or-break year. He started off just, setting the world on absolute fire, and then he struggled and struggled some more and struggled some more. This is probably his last year to kind of show what he's able to do or not do. Don't really like him, but I do like the Andre Smith signing and Alex Boone. They know they have to protect Bridgewater. They have to open up some holes for Adrian Peterson, and they address their offensive line in free agency a lot better than the Lions did. We have some of the same issues. Would have loved to say, Andre Smith is slotted to start at right tackle. You feel a lot more comfortable with him there with Michael Ola, and at least there's a back and forth. Not saying that Ola won't be good, but you need someone behind him, and I would love someone to push him because, we just saw him for a short glimpse, as well as Alex Boone. Again, the 49ers they've had quality lineman after quality lineman. He's another one, and so we have to deal with this 2 games a year. And they've got some older guys, Griffin and Robinson, just a really good team. They're drafting well. They've got a young coach, a young quarterback, and one of the best running backs in the game. I think, I hate to, doubt my boys, but realistically, right now, in my opinion, based on talent and the previous few years, it's going to come down to Minnesota and Green Bay for supremacy in the NFC North, in my opinion, unless some things change. All right, guys, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about April in the D. We love our Lions, but we're going to talk about some of the other teams. This is a fine month to be a fan here in Detroit. So we'll do a little April in the D, and then we'll end it off, however you want to word it. We'll close out with a little bit of NFL draft talk. So stay right here on the Hindsight 20. Jerry Mallory here for the Hindsight 20 podcast. Your ad can be placed right here. It's simple. If you want your company's business that's hopefully ever growing and improving to link up with a podcast network that's ever growing and improving, send me an email, hindsight20podcast@gmail.com. Back on the Hindsight 20, April in the D, right? We love talking about Detroit sports, April in the D. Now, the first song we all love, April in the D, April in the D. Really cool thing. Not a fan of the new iterations, the covers and things they tried to do. And I think people mock it now because it's like, oh, April in the D. But guys, it really, honestly, is a fun time in Detroit sports, especially when the Wings and the Pistons are both in the playoff race / in the playoffs. Because at that point, there's plenty of dialogue and conversation and excitement for all 4 Detroit major teams. So let's talk about them all. We'll start with the Red Wings. You gotta love the streak, man. Yeah, they may have did a Michael Jackson and moonwalked into the playoffs. They may have backpedaled, whatever you want to call it, but they're in. It's no small feat. A quarter of a century in the playoffs. Now, how will they do? Not liking their chances. It's weird, for a while there, the goalie situation, you say it's going to be Mazurek. He's going to be there and he's going to be the guy to do it. But then Jimmy Howard starts playing good. A couple weeks ago, it's funny. It's like, I wasn't rooting against Jimmy Howard, but it's like, as long as he's out playing, they're probably going to put him out there, and I'm not comfortable with it. We'll see how that bears out. I don't think they'll go too far, but it's a good narrative. ESPN and other outlets love to talk about, the last time the Lions won in Lambeau Field, it was all those cheesy stats that I hated. I went ahead and read one of those cheesy stats because it was good. It was talking about my boys. It was talking about the Red Wings. The last time the Red Wings weren't in the playoffs, Pretty Woman was the big movie, and and Madonna's Vogue was all the rage. It was cool, whereas when it was talking about the Lions negatively, I was sick of it. It's good to hear one of those, the last time, et cetera things happen. Just looking at this Red Wings team, the scope of them, to me, they kind of, if we're going to do a comparison to other teams, the Spurs' longevity, they've been in the playoffs now for about 17 or so years. The Spurs have like 5 titles. The Wings have 4 in this iteration. 97? It's off the top of my head. 97, 98, 2002, and 2000. Was it 7 or 8 when I know we lost to the Penguins in the second matchup. Then we beat them. I can't remember if it was 2007 or 2008. But the point is, the longevity there kind of reminds you of the Spurs. The dynasty just always being there and legitimate kind of reminds you of the Patriots. Not as dominant, but man, they've always been there. Now you look, the Blackhawks are like, they're building something, man. You look at the amount of Stanley Cups they've won recently. They were bad just 10 years ago. They've made a huge rebound. The Blackhawks were so bad that in 2006, I won tickets by way of 1130 WDFN to go to Chicago. But not only go to Chicago, it was to go to a Bulls game. They were playing the Pistons. Nice hotel. It was sponsored by Vitamin Water, 2 cases of Vitamin Water. They paid for the hotel, the travel there. We met Chauncey Billups. I mean, it was a great experience. They gave us a signed jersey. I mean, it was awesome. But just to highlight how bad the Blackhawks were just 10 years ago, in 2006, they were so bad, they had $1 tickets. For $1, you can see the Blackhawks. The seats were like first come, first serve. I went ahead and didn't stay the whole game. They were playing Columbus, I think, the Blue Jackets. So at that time, I said, I'll get a chance to see Sergei Fedorov. And I stayed for a couple of periods. But 10 years from removed from that, and they're this dynasty. But the Wings, they definitely are, the last quarter century have built themselves a fine dynasties, 4 Stanley Cups, however you want to word, backtracking, moonwalking in the playoffs. I don't really care. They're in, and I'm proud of the boys. Same with the Pistons, man. So proud of this team. Dude, Stan Van Gundy, I really like this guy. I feel like he is a brilliant basketball mind, and he's gotten the shaft unjustifiably, unfortunately, unfairly on a couple of occasions. In Orlando, it was this whole deal with Dwight Howard, and the player won out. Unfortunately, the player is a big baby. He hasn't panned out in a couple of places. If they could have did it over again, perhaps they would have traded Dwight Howard, because at that point you could have got an absolute haul for him. Okay? Not a HALL, a HAUL haul for the man. And you could have kept a great coach, but it didn't work that way. Then in Miami, before he went to Orlando, he was instrumental in the championship for the Heat in 2006. He was the one that made sure Shaq and Dwayne Wade had this mesh. Pat Riley's looking on at the team and is like, you know what? I'll go ahead and take this team, and then they win the final. Stan Van is the man, in my opinion. You look at our team 2 years ago, at the beginning of last year, and you had Josh Smith and Monroe and Kyle Singler, and it just wasn't working. To the team we have now, 2 monumental trades the last 2 seasons. You got Reggie Jackson for nothing, man. You got Reggie Jackson for peanuts. Kyle Singler and DJ Augustine for Reggie Jackson, a top 10 point guard, borderline all-star. He has flaws, and he struggled the last month here. When it was time to clinch a playoff spot, he showed up, 39 points. Love the guy. Absolutely love him. And then Tobias Harris. People don't talk about him. I think he's under the radar, low key. He's the best offensive player we have. Super skilled. We got him for basically nothing. Ersan Ilyasova and Brandon Jennings. We love Jennings, but hasn't been the same since the Achilles. You look at the team that he's brought in, key free agent signings. Steve Blake has been solid. Aaron Baines has been a really good backup. And now they're headed to the playoffs. It's going to all depend, in terms of how many wins they get, if they'll be the 7th or 8th seed. Right now they're the 8th seed. You need the Pacers to lose one, and then we would have to win out. The 7th or 8th seed is important to me because it's a difference of playing LeBron and the Cavs or Toronto and the Raptors. I think LeBron and the Cavs will remain in that 1st seed. I would like to jump up to 7th. even though we've technically played Cleveland better this year than we have Toronto, the way they choked last year in the playoffs, they have to show me that they're capable of being a playoff team. I just don't think you can hang with LeBron. Other than Cleveland, I think we have a shot to hang with and be dangerous and potentially beat any other team. So we'll see what happens. Andre Drummond, the free throws are getting out of hand. There's a lot of talk about that. We have a show. We'll be coming up this upcoming weekend. Count that baby in the file. Myself and my cousin Kevin Evans talking about the Pistons every week. There's so much to talk about. The playoffs will be right there. Andre Drummond. So I'm not going to give you too much more of a spiel, but really proud of my boys. Proud to say that this is going to be a fun April in the league because you're going to have the Wings and the Pistons. And yes, the draft and the Tigers are just starting. Let's talk about the Tigers for just a second. As you know, we have the Tigers Talk podcast here on Detroit Sports Podcast, so check that out. I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. They're starting off, they're 3-1. Justin Verlander and Anibal Sanchez looked very good. Zimmerman looked really good. If those three guys can be as solid as they looked in the first game, then the sky's the limit. Each of them, have the potential to be 20-game winners. No, they won't each be 20-game winners. I don't think any of them will be. But they're that talented. That's the point I'm making. We know what Verlander has done. The Cy Youngs, the MVPs, the 20-plus games. Anibal Sanchez being the ERA king just a few seasons ago. And Zimmerman always liked this guy from the Washington Nationals. If they can each get us an average of 14 wins, maybe one gets 16, one gets 13, one gets, if they can give us an average of 14 wins, it's a nice 1-2-3 combo. Now, Pelfrey didn't look that good. He looked good in spring training, but he got lit up a little bit in his first game. And then the bullpen, they settled down. Frankie Rod was, he was shaky that first game. That first game, you're like, oh, here we go again. Is it us? We just can't get this thing right. Every time we try to bring in a closer, Joe Nathan looking great, and then he comes and he's horrible. Frankie Rod's going to be okay. All right, K-Rod. Not the young buck fastball throwing guy he used to be, but he'll be just fine. In terms of hitting, Justin Upton, this is what you're going to get from him, man. He's a little streaky, but I like what I've seen with him on defense. The strikeouts, they know who they were signing, okay? He strikes out a lot, but he's going to turn things around. Kinsler, hot start, you like that. V-Mart, that center field shot as a pinch hitter, you really like to see that. And Miggy's Miggy. I always tell people, I think we get comfortable, and this is just natural. We're used to seeing Miguel so much. We're not in awe anymore, but we should be, okay? There's the older guys that talk about, hey, I saw Ted Williams play and I saw Ty Cobb or Babe Ruth. Miggy's that type of guy. Decades in the future, we'll be saying, yeah, I saw Miggy play. I was there for his 500th home run or this RBI. I was there to Triple Crown. Let's not take this guy for granted. Enjoy every at-bat. Enjoy every moment. I was coming home from work Thursday's game, and I pulled up into the gas station, and I was about to, go ahead and pump my gas, but Miggy was at the plate. I was just kind of having this story with a buddy of mine saying we should enjoy him and saying he's, in my opinion, the best Detroit athlete or one of ever. You got Gordie Howe and Joe Louis. There's a lot of guys. Miggy's up there, okay? You got an issue with that? Send me an email or Twitter. I think he's up there. But anyways, just having that conversation with someone. And so I'm pulling up at the gas station. Miggy's at the plate. So instead of hopping right out, I said, you know what? I keep telling people to enjoy Miggy and appreciate him. I'm going to wait to pump the gas. And sure enough, there was, bam, that first home run. He did not disappoint. He never does. We'll see what this team can do with LB. It's so early, 4 games in. Can't form much of an opinion yet. But I'll say this much. So far, so good. So closing out April in the D and closing out our show is a little bit of NFL draft talk. The last few shows we've talked about first and second round picks. That's still in the mix. I'll give you one guy that could be drafted a little bit later, maybe a 4th round target, a little article about him, local guy. And then there are some mock drafts, a few more guys from NFL.com. Now, draft one, sign one. Draft one, sign one. That still applies for both defensive end and offensive tackle. Now, we did bring in Wallace Gilberry. That's the sign one, the veteran. He should play behind Ziggy and Devin Taylor, but we still have to draft one. Tackle, still got to sign one and draft one. If it doesn't happen in the first round, just keep in mind a few names for your listening pleasure. You have Willie Beavers from Western Michigan. Now, my boy, Chris Gandy, those Detroit guys, their podcast, always entertaining, informative. He doesn't like Beavers. I'm a little higher on him than he is. I think he does have good athleticism. He's definitely got to get stronger, though. You know, we've seen with guys that don't have the strength that you love early on and how they've struggled, like Mr. Travis Swanson. So we have to consider that. Now, Cody Whitehair, by all accounts, he'll be an interior lineman, although he did play some tackle. Think Zach Martin, who played guard, tackle, and a little center. But when it came down to the NFL time, he was an interior. But I'm just throwing a name out there, a guy that I've seen some first-round grades, but I can see him fall into the second. Beavers, a guy that could be second or third round. Then Jason Spriggs, this will definitely be a second rounder if he makes it to us. Very athletic. Big guy out of Indiana. Think about Lane Johnson, one of those athletic freaks. Again, I don't think he's going to go in the middle of the second round. I can see him being first round or even early second, but there's a chance he can fall to us. We've talked about Taylor Decker, and we've talked about Jack Conklin quite a bit. Now Ronnie Stanley's even being brought up in the mix. At one point, it wasn't really looking like it was going to be a possibility that he'd fall to us, but now you're starting to hear about it. But here's another guy to consider, and I don't know how I feel about this right now. I've seen Ryan Kelly, from Alabama, being mentioned as a top 15 pick. Consensus best center, one of the best center prospects to come out in a little while. It's not because Travis Swanson, because I think he's a appalling heap, or at least he has been so far. Oh yeah, he was injured, whatever, until I see otherwise. But it's just the fact that at that spot, I know there's going to be a defensive end, and if not a defensive end, there'll be a tackle, defensive or offensive, and even linebacker that I probably would like more than Ryan Kelly. But you've been hearing the name, so I'm just going to throw it out there. I've been hearing it, seeing it, reading about it, so I'll mention it to you as well. Ryan Kelly, center from Alabama, and obviously in the second round, which I don't think he will be now, that's a whole different ballgame. But that first round pick, I'd be a little bit hesitant. Now let's talk about the one late round guy, Aaron Burbridge, wide receiver, Michigan State. I like this guy, man. Doesn't have the measurables you love, 6 feet, just a shade over 200 pounds. He ran like a 4.4, 840. Okay, that doesn't wow you. But if you watch Michigan State, you cut on the film, this guy runs good routes. He makes the crazy catches. Just a solid player. Now, I hate to compare him to another Michigan State guy, but to me, Derek Mason, he never wowed you with the physicality, but he was always there. He was always making the big catch. He was always dependable. Now, he was a lot more athletic, coming out, but overall, as his years progressed in the NFL, he was just there. He was solid. Aaron Burbridge, if you're sitting there in the fourth round, and we still probably will be bringing in a receiver, and you haven't addressed it yet, I have absolutely no problem bringing this guy in. So, to close the show out, let's talk about a couple of mock drafts. We went with NFL.com for this show. And Charlie Casserly, I don't know how you predict a trade, but he did. He's got the Lions trading 2 spots back to number 18 and picking Shaq Lawson. In Detroit, we've loved it, Trade down. We always talk about trading down. We very rarely do it. This year, we've got so many picks. Trade down, get some more. Then you could probably trade up and make some other noise. But they're talking about Shaq Lawson. Even if it's there at 16, you like that pick. Bucky Brooks, A'Shawn Robinson. I'm not a big fan of A'Shawn. And I'm not really a fan of picking the defensive tackle at 16 at all. I've given you the reasons before. The depth at the position. Thinking you can get a guy almost as good in the second round. But that's the pick he's got. And then Daniel Jeremiah, Chris Jones, defensive tackle, Mississippi State. It's clear. The trenches, that's where everyone's talking, Defensive tackle, defensive end, offensive tackle. One of those positions you got to believe will be addressed. There's always, though, the wild card, And we don't know exactly how Quinn's going to move. This is his first go round, but you're hearing a lot of talk for those positions. Guys, it's been a fun show. We had a little sad moment there with Will Smith. We went ahead and talked about some good old draft coverage. We talked about another foe in the Minnesota Vikings. It's been a fun show. Hey, we'll be back next week. We're getting closer and closer and closer to the draft. We'll have a couple of guests on. Maybe there'll be a move or two for the Lions in any event, however it pans out. You can come right back here next Monday for your Lions Fix. As always, I'm Jerry Mallory. You can find me hanging out with the boys at Pride Detroit. You can find me on Twitter at Jerry Mallory NFL. And hey, you might find me at Ford Field hanging out too. Until next Monday, I want to thank each and every one of you for listening to the Hindsight 20 podcast.